Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Parker here, coming to you from my front porch. It is Thursday, April the 23rd. Yesterday, the question of the day revolved around looking at the pretrial and the trial steps and process, and there's a lot to it. But I asked you three questions, and question one is the first part of the question was how many times does a defendant go in front of a judge before the trial, the pretrial process, and that's actually two times. The first time where they're arraigned, they're told what the charges are, and the second time is after a grand jury has decided whether or not the state and the prosecution should proceed with charges. Both times the judge basically informs the defendant of these things, right? The second part of that question that I asked yesterday was how do you avoid going to trial? And I put in there's lots of possible answers. Now, if you really look at the information, it's basically if the defendant says guilty before the trial, then they have pled guilty and there's no reason to go to trial. Or they take a plea deal. Their lawyer, their particular defense attorney, will make an agreement with the prosecution. Maybe, okay, if my client agrees to plead guilty to part of the charges, maybe not all of them, then we'll take a smaller sentencing, a lesser sentencing, maybe 5 years instead of 15, or maybe it's time served and then 20 hours community service, and they take a deal. Okay, that's the primary way to avoid a court case going to actual trial. But then you also have the fact that you can avoid it by not getting in trouble in the first place. That's probably easier, in my opinion. And that's what I would recommend for you. And the last part is what two crucial tasks does the jury actually carry out in a trial? And they're both really important. First, and obviously, the jury decides whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty. And then the second, which you probably don't think as much about, is that the jury is responsible for the sentencing portion. So let's say the jury decides the defendant is guilty, and then they're going to deliberate again, and the judge is going to come in and say, well, people who are guilty of this crime usually are sentenced to, let's just say, 30 years. Or you could do more or less, and the jury essentially helps the judge make that final decision, or I would say the judge helps the jury make that final decision. But that's a very important aspect of a jury. Jury duty is important because it is critical in the proper and effective execution of our justice system. You deserve, if you wind up in a situation where you're defended, a jury of your peers, people that are like you, to render impartial understandings and findings on what the prosecution has brought against you. All right. Today's question of the day and the last question of the day of the week is pretty challenging. Going to make you think a little bit. You actually have to analyze some information about the two critical aspects of judges in the judicial system. Judges obviously render justice, like we were just talking about. They're the ones that run the trial by jury, the court. But they also are responsible for interpreting laws and deciding whether they are constitutional or unconstitutional, right? That's called judicial review. That's what the Supreme Court does. So the question of the day today is, which one of those do you think is more important in protecting our legal system? And our legal system is critical in creating our way of life here in the United States and in Georgia. So which one is more important to you? Which one do you think, in your opinion, is more important for protecting our way of life? Is it the fact that judges render justice, or that they interpret laws and decide if they're constitutional or not? That is the content question of the day, and that wraps up the instruction for the week. Next week, we're going to look at the juvenile justice system. Very important for y'all, for sure. So I hope you have a great day, have a great weekend. Make sure you've answered all four questions. You answer all four questions, you get 100. You answer 3 of them, you get a 75. They're each worth 25 points. Does that make sense? All right. Keep your eye on the weather today. Have a good one. Bye-bye.